Never in my wildest imagination did I think a peaceful evening at my cabin would turn into a story so outrageous that even the cops ended up shaking their heads in disbelief. But that's exactly what happened the night I came home and found someone who didn't belong anywhere near my property. Picture this: I had just returned from a long day out on the lake, fishing rod still in the back of my truck, a bucket of fresh bass in my hand, feeling that rare mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that only comes from being outdoors. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in orange and purple streaks, and all I wanted to do was kick off my boots, fry up some fish, and enjoy the quiet of the evening. But as I walked up the path to my cabin, something immediately felt off. My front door was cracked open. I stopped in my tracks. I knew, absolutely knew, that I had locked that door before leaving earlier. I never leave it open, not even when I step outside for a moment. That little detail sent alarm bells ringing in my head. My grip tightened on the bucket handle. My first thought was maybe a raccoon had somehow pushed it open, or maybe the wind. But then again, my cabin's door is heavy solid oak, not the type to just swing wide without a good shove. My gut told me something was wrong. I pushed the door open slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. What I saw inside made my blood boil. There, sprawled out on my couch like he owned the place, was a young man I had never seen before. He was flipping through channels on my TV with one hand, stuffing chips into his mouth with the other, like this was his weekend getaway spot. My living room smelled faintly of the soda can he had already cracked open, and I could see my fridge door hanging wide open with half its contents scattered on the counter. My jaw tightened as I stepped fully into the room. I demanded, "Who are you and why are you in my house?" The guy didn't even flinch. He didn't jump up, didn't apologize, didn't act scared. Instead, he smirked at me like I was the one intruding. "Chill out, dude," he said, not even looking away from the TV. "My mom runs the HOA. That means I can crash here whenever I want." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My mom runs the HOA? That was his justification for breaking into my cabin, eating my food, and lounging in my living room? I took a step closer, my voice sharper this time. "You're trespassing. This is my private property. Get out, now, before I call the cops." That's when he leaned back, swung his feet up onto my coffee table, and gave me the cockiest grin I've ever seen. "Nah, man. Don't stress. You don't get it. This whole area's under HOA rules. My mom's the president, so technically this place falls under her control. I can come and go as I please." I was floored. Was this kid serious? Did he actually believe that the HOA president could hand out permission slips for breaking and entering? I wasn't sure whether to laugh or drag him out myself. His casual arrogance made my skin crawl. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't embarrassed. He genuinely thought he had every right to be there because of his mother's title. Trying to keep calm, I repeated, "This is my cabin. I bought it. I pay for it. And you have no right to be here. I'm giving you one last chance, leave before this gets ugly." But instead of leaving, he doubled down. "Go ahead and call the cops. Won't make a difference. Mom runs everything around here. You think they're gonna do anything to me? Please." He laughed, actually laughed, like the whole thing was a joke at my expense. My patience snapped. I wasn't about to let some entitled kid with a power-drunk mother walk all over me. I pulled out my phone right there, stepped back outside onto the porch, and dialed 911. I explained the situation to the dispatcher as clearly as possible. A young man had broken into my cabin, was refusing to leave, and was claiming his mom runs the HOA as his excuse. The dispatcher confirmed officers were on their way. When I walked back inside, the guy was still sitting there, still munching away like he was hosting a football party in my living room. Except now, he was grinning wider, phone in hand. "You really did it, huh?" he said smugly. Well, I called my mom. She's on her way. And when she gets here, you'll see. You'll regret messing with her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Instead of panicking or bolting out the door, he doubled down by calling reinforcements, his mother. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He was about to learn that his mom's HOA crown meant absolutely nothing to the law. Those few minutes waiting for the cops felt like forever. My pulse was still racing, my mind juggling between anger and disbelief. Who raised a kid to think the world bent to his family's rules? The nerve of breaking into someone's home and treating it like a clubhouse. But as much as I wanted to kick him out myself, I knew better. I wasn't about to give Karen's son, or Karen herself, any ammo to twist the story against me. So I stood my ground, arms crossed, staring him down, waiting for this ridiculous situation to blow up the way I knew it would. Sure enough, I soon heard the sound of screeching tires outside, and it wasn't the police. It was a white SUV pulling up fast into my driveway. Out stormed a woman in yoga pants and oversized sunglasses, stomping like the ground owed her something. She was already yelling before she reached the porch, voice shrill and demanding. I knew immediately, this had to be his mom. And that, right there, was the moment I realized this night wasn't going to be just about a break-in. It was about to become a full-on war with the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA and her entitled heir. Karen didn't waste a second before making her presence known. She stormed up the steps of my porch like she owned the place, pointing at me before even setting foot inside. Her voice pierced the quiet evening like nails on a chalkboard. How dare you accuse my son of trespassing? Don't you know who I am? I'm the president of the HOA, and this entire community answers to me. Her words echoed off the trees as neighbors began peeking from their windows, curious about the commotion. She wasn't embarrassed to cause a scene, no, she thrived on it. I kept my arms crossed, leaning against the porch railing, refusing to be intimidated. Ma'am, I said, keeping my tone even, your son broke into my cabin. He's sitting on my couch, eating my food, and acting like this is his property. That's trespassing. The police are already on their way. Her sunglasses slid down her nose as she glared at me with icy blue eyes. You listen to me and you listen good, she barked. If you live here, you follow our rules. My son has every right to use these facilities, including your cabin. Everything here falls under my authority. You're lucky we even let outsiders like you buy property here. Her words burned through me. Outsider. Lucky. As if the money I spent buying this cabin, the paperwork, the blood and sweat I put into making it my retreat, meant nothing in her mind. I clenched my fists at my sides but forced myself to stay calm. Losing my cool would only feed her performance. She turned to her son, who had finally stepped out onto the porch, looking smug behind her. Don't worry, sweetie, she said loudly, making sure I heard every word. This man is confused. He doesn't understand how HOA rights work. You're allowed to be here, and I'll make sure he knows it. Her son smirked and puffed out his chest, emboldened by her presence. Yeah, Mom's right. This place is basically part of the community center. So stop acting like you're some big-shot homeowner. That was it. The sheer arrogance dripping from both of them made me want to laugh out loud. A community center? My private cabin that I paid for with my own money was suddenly community property because they said so? The entitlement was unbelievable. But just as I opened my mouth to fire back, flashing red and blue lights lit up the driveway. A patrol car rolled in, tires crunching on gravel, and two uniformed officers stepped out. Relief flooded through me. Finally, the circus was about to end. Karen, of course, saw this as her cue to turn the drama up a notch. She bolted down the steps, running toward the officers like they were her personal security detail. Officers! Thank goodness you're here, she cried, tears already streaming down her cheeks as if she were starring in her own soap opera. "This man is harassing my son, locking him out of facilities he's allowed to use, and he even threatened him. Please, you have to do something before this escalates further." I stood there, completely stunned. Harassing her son? Threatening him? She had twisted the entire situation in a matter of seconds, spinning herself as the victim and me as the aggressor. It was such an absurd performance that for a moment, I wondered if the officers would actually believe her. She played the part well, her voice trembling, her hands clutching at her chest as though she were moments away from fainting. Her son stood behind her, nodding along, pretending to look shaken. The neighbors across the street whispered among themselves, probably wondering who to believe. The officers approached the porch calmly, one of them raising his hand. "All right, let's slow down and get the facts straight. We need to hear from everyone." I stepped forward, pulling my wallet from my pocket and offering my driver's license. "My name is James," I said clearly. "I'm the owner of this cabin. I came home and found this young man inside without my permission. He was watching my TV, eating my food, and refusing to leave. I called 911 immediately. Then, I pointed toward the cabin door. You can see my fridge door hanging open, my belongings moved around. I have the deed to this property inside my safe if you need proof." The officer nodded, taking my license and jotting down notes. Then he turned to Karen's son. "Can we see your ID, please?" The kid scoffed and held out nothing but a student ID from the local community college. "That's all I need to show you," he said arrogantly. "My mom's the HOA president. She told you already, that's all the proof you need. I'm allowed to be here." The officer's eyebrows rose. "Sir, that's not how this works. We need government-issued ID and an explanation of why you think you're allowed inside someone else's home." The kid folded his arms and said, "Because my mom runs everything here. She said it's fine, so it's fine." His arrogance was almost comical. Karen, still clutching her chest dramatically, jumped back in. "Officers, please, don't waste your time with paperwork. I run this community. If I say my son can be here, he can be here. We don't need to get bogged down with unnecessary formalities. This man," she pointed at me like I was some sort of criminal, "is an outsider who doesn't understand our rules. He's making trouble for no reason." One of the officers turned to her, his face calm but his voice firm. "Ma'am, are you telling us that your son has the right to enter and occupy another homeowner's private property without permission?" Karen straightened up, chin high, and with full confidence declared, "Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's how HOA privileges work. If he wants to watch TV here, he can. If he wants to spend the night, he can. I oversee everything in this neighborhood, and that includes this cabin." The silence that followed was deafening. Even her son shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering for the first time. The officer looked at his partner, then back at her. "That's not how the law works, ma'am." His words cut through her arrogance like a knife. I could see the cracks starting to form in their confidence. Her son's smug grin disappeared completely, and Karen's hands began to tremble ever so slightly, though she tried to cover it by crossing her arms. But even then, she couldn't stop herself. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I have authority here. I can file violations, I can fine people, I can decide what happens to every property in this community." The officer didn't even blink. "And none of that overrides state law, ma'am." In that moment, standing on my porch with the flashing lights bouncing off the cabin walls, I felt the shift. The power dynamic flipped completely. Karen and her son had entered this situation believing they were untouchable, but the reality of the law was beginning to corner them. And I could already tell, the next few minutes were about to deliver the justice they never saw coming. The officers didn't waste time. They wanted facts, evidence, and clarity. While one of them stood near Karen, clearly already fed up with her entitled tone, the other motioned for me to grab my documents. I walked into my cabin, my boots crunching on the chip crumbs scattered across my rug, and opened my fireproof safe. Inside was the deed to my cabin, proof of ownership with my name in bold print. I carried it back to the porch and handed it over without hesitation. The officer scanned it carefully, nodding as he confirmed my identity against the driver's license I had already given him. Meanwhile, Karen's son stood there with his arms crossed, rolling his eyes like this was all a big inconvenience for him. When the officer asked again for proper identification, the kid just shoved his student ID forward and muttered, "That's all you're getting. I don't need to prove anything else. My mom runs this HOA, and her word is law." The officers exchanged a look that spoke volumes. One of them raised his eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, before turning to Karen. "Ma'am, your son entered this property without consent. That's breaking and entering. Do you understand that?" Karen gasped dramatically, clutching at her pearls like the words were an insult. "Breaking and entering? Are you kidding me? He didn't break anything. The door was open. He walked in. And as the HOA president, I have authority over how these properties are used. If I say he's allowed, then he's allowed. That's not a crime, it's community management." Her confidence was surreal. She really believed her HOA title gave her powers that overrode the law itself. The officer shook his head slowly, clearly trying to remain patient. "Ma'am, HOA rules cover landscaping, parking, maybe noise complaints. They do not give anyone the right to walk into someone else's private residence. That's a criminal matter." But Karen wasn't backing down. "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice rising so loudly that even more neighbors came outside to watch. "This cabin is part of the community. My son has every right to enjoy it. And if you try to arrest him, you'll regret it. I'll have your jobs by morning." Her threats hung in the air like toxic smoke. Her son grinned, emboldened by her outburst, and sneered at me. "Told you, man. Nothing's gonna happen. My mom runs everything." I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept silent. This was no longer my battle, it was the law's. The officers, however, were not swayed by Karen's performance. One of them turned to me. "Sir, can you walk us through what you saw when you got home?" I described everything in detail, the cracked door, the stranger on my couch, the fridge open, my food being eaten, the chips, the soda can. I explained how he refused to leave and instead claimed his mom's HOA role gave him authority to stay. Every word I spoke was calm, factual, and direct. The officer jotted everything down, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he turned back to Karen's son. "Is any of that true?" The kid shrugged, his smug grin returning. "Yeah, I was inside. But like I said, I didn't break in. And my mom said it's fine. So it's not illegal." That was the moment the officer's patience snapped. He straightened, voice firm, "No nonsense. It doesn't matter if the door was unlocked or not. You don't live here. You don't pay for this property. You don't have the owner's consent. That makes it unlawful entry, and that's a crime. You can't just walk into someone else's home because your mom says so." The smirk slid off the kid's face instantly. For the first time that evening, his arrogance cracked. He glanced nervously at his mother, but Karen wasn't giving up. She stepped between the officer and her son, practically shaking with rage. "No. You will not lay a hand on my child. Do you hear me? I'm the president of this HOA, and you are overstepping your authority. If you arrest him, I'll have a lawsuit filed against this department before sunrise. You can't treat my family this way." The officer stayed calm, but his patience was gone. "Ma'am, step aside. Your son committed a crime. If you continue to interfere, you may also face charges for obstruction. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger by now, some recording the scene on their phones. Whispers rippled through them, and I could see smirks of satisfaction on a few faces. Clearly, Karen had been pulling her "I run this HOA" card for years, and they were thrilled to finally see her arrogance catching up with her. The second officer moved closer, cuffs in hand. Karen's son tried to back away, but the officer caught his arm and pulled it behind his back. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the night like justice itself. Karen shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made dogs bark down the road. "No! You can't arrest my son. This is harassment. This is abuse of power." She lunged forward, trying to grab her son, but the first officer gently but firmly pushed her back. "Ma'am, I'm warning you, back up now." Her son was pale, his cocky attitude gone completely. The reality of handcuffs on his wrists had shattered whatever illusion of invincibility his mother had built around him. "Mom! Do something," he cried, his voice breaking. But Karen was powerless. She could scream, she could threaten, she could wave her HOA title around like a crown, but none of it mattered. The law was not her playground, and tonight, her empire of fear was crumbling right in front of everyone. As the officers led her son toward the patrol car, Karen stumbled after them, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You'll regret this. I'll have your badges. You don't know who you're dealing with." Her words were desperate now, less commanding and more pathetic. The officers ignored her, guiding her son into the back seat of the car as the cuffs clinked against the metal. The neighbors clapped quietly, some even cheering under their breath. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and relief. The officer who had spoken to me earlier returned, handing back my documents. "Sir, thank you for staying calm. We'll file a full report. You may need to appear in court as a witness." I nodded, my voice steady. "I'll be there. Thank you for handling this." He gave a small nod before walking back to his car. Karen was still yelling, still threatening, but it was no use. Her son was in the back seat of a patrol car, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the car pulled out of the driveway, red and blue lights reflecting off her tear-streaked face, Karen stood frozen, trembling with rage and humiliation. For once, her title meant nothing. For once, she wasn't in control. And for me, that was the sweetest justice I could have asked for. Karen's shrill voice echoed through the night long after the patrol car disappeared down the gravel road with her son in the back seat. She stood frozen in my driveway, fists clenched at her sides, her body shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. The flashing red and blue lights had vanished into the distance, but the damage was already done. Neighbors lingered outside their homes, whispering, some even recording the aftermath. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one in control of the story. She wasn't feared, she wasn't obeyed, and she certainly wasn't respected. She was just a woman screaming at the dark, powerless to undo what had just happened. I leaned against my porch railing, arms crossed, watching her unravel. She noticed me staring and snapped, "You think this is over? You think you've won? My son will be out by morning, and when he is, you'll regret ever messing with me. I'll bury you in violations and fines until you sell this cabin and crawl back to wherever you came from." Her voice cracked on the last few words, betraying her desperation. She was grasping at straws, clinging to the only kind of authority she'd ever known. I didn't even bother responding. She had just watched her son hauled off in handcuffs, and yet she was still clinging to her imaginary crown. There was no reasoning with someone like that. I simply turned, walked into my cabin, and closed the door behind me, leaving her to scream into the night air. Inside, the mess her son had left behind was still scattered across my living room. Chip bags crumpled on the floor, soda dripping from the counter, my couch cushions thrown aside like it was his personal hangout spot. I sighed, grabbed a trash bag, and started cleaning up. As frustrating as it was, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Because for the first time since moving into this community, I knew Karen's reign of intimidation was cracking. And it wouldn't stop with tonight. The next morning, the gossip mill was in full swing. At the local cafe near the lake, people were buzzing with the story. I overheard whispers from a group of neighbors at the next table. Did you hear? Karen's boy got arrested for breaking into that new guy's cabin. Can you believe it? Another neighbor chimed in, honestly, I can. That woman has been terrorizing people for years. She finally picked the wrong fight. I kept my head down, sipping my coffee, but I couldn't help smiling into the mug. Word was spreading fast, and it wasn't me who looked bad, it was Karen. Later that week, I got a call from the county courthouse. They confirmed her son was being charged with trespassing and unlawful entry. They wanted me to come in as a witness and provide a statement. I agreed immediately. When the day came, I stood in front of the judge, explaining calmly what had happened. Karen's son sat at the defense table, looking pale and exhausted, no trace of the cocky grin he'd worn that night. Karen herself was there too, sitting stiffly in the front row, glaring daggers at me like I was the one on trial. But her glares meant nothing now. This was a courtroom, not an HOA meeting. The judge listened carefully, then turned his attention to the young man. You entered a private residence without permission. Do you understand that's a crime? For a moment, I thought the kid might try to blame his mother again, but he just lowered his head and muttered, Yes, Your Honor. His lawyer nudged him to continue, and he added, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it. The apology was hollow, but at least it was an acknowledgement. The judge handed down the sentence, probation, community service, and a permanent record. Karen gasped, clutching her chest, but there was nothing she could do. Her son wasn't walking away scot-free this time. He was walking away with consequences that would follow him for years. After the trial, as we left the courthouse, Karen stormed up to me, her voice low but venomous. You ruined my son's life, she hissed. You could have let it go, but no, you had to make a spectacle of it. This isn't over. I looked her dead in the eye and replied, No, Karen. Your son ruined his own life when he broke into my home. And you ruined yours by teaching him he could get away with it. She froze, her face twitching with fury, but she didn't have a comeback. She spun on her heel and stomped away, her empire of fear crumbling piece by piece. But the story didn't end there. The fallout hit her harder than she expected. The HOA board, tired of the constant complaints and embarrassed by her public meltdown, called a special meeting. One by one, neighbors stood up and voiced their grievances. How she had fined them for trivial things like flower pots on porches, how she had harassed families for minor parking violations, how she had used her position to intimidate rather than lead. The breaking point was her abuse of power with her son. The board voted, and for the first time in years, Karen was out. Stripped of her presidency, stripped of her power, and stripped of the fear she had wielded like a weapon. The change in the neighborhood was immediate. People walked with a little more confidence, kids played outside without being scolded for noise violations, and folks actually started talking to each other instead of keeping their heads down. It was like the whole place could finally breathe again. As for me, I went back to enjoying my cabin in peace. I spent mornings fishing, afternoons fixing up little projects, and evenings on the porch watching the sunset. The lake sparkled with the kind of quiet beauty I had dreamed of when I bought the place. No more drama, no more threats, no more Karen banging on my door. Sometimes I'd see her in passing, driving through the neighborhood with her sunglasses on, refusing to look at anyone. The arrogance that once clung to her like a second skin was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like bitterness. And every time I saw her, I couldn't help but remember that night, her screaming, "My mom runs the HOA," while her son was hauled off to jail. The memory never failed to make me chuckle. Because in the end, the truth was undeniable, HOA titles might scare neighbors, but they don't scare the law. No amount of screaming, threatening, or pretending could change that. Karen thought she could bend reality with her position, and she passed that delusion on to her son. But reality has a way of crashing down hard. Her son learned it in handcuffs, and she learned it when the very board she ruled over voted her out. And me? I learned that sometimes you don't have to fight fire with fire. You just let the law do its job, and the bullies dig their own graves. Now, every time I sit on my porch at night, watching the water ripple under the moonlight, I think back to that moment. Karen screaming, neighbors filming, officers clapping handcuffs around her son's wrists. And I smile. Because that was the night the HOA queen lost her crown, and her son traded it for a jail cell.